Well, my dad was in the Air Force, so I got these complimentary pictures when I was about 4 years old of Apollo 11 that he got, I guess, as an officer to kind of commemorate the event, and I put them up in my bedroom, about maybe 10 or 12 9x12 color pictures of it, and I saw them every day from about 4 to 14. They were always on my wall no matter where we moved. And then about age 14, I was watching a program called PM Magazine, kind of a syndicated news magazine program, and they had a guest on there by the name of Bill Casing, who used to work for Rocketdyne, a contractor at NASA, during the development of the Apollo program. And he asserted that the moon missions were fraudulent, that they did not have the capability to go to the moon, and therefore they bluffed, like in a poker game, to pretend that we were more advanced than we really were. I was an open-minded 14-year-old, so I thought, I never thought about that. Let me go and take a look at these pictures again. And there's an old saying, eyes wide shut. Sure enough, unless you are looking for something, you really may not see it. And then I started noticing the inconsistencies in the picture that he brought about, like shadows intersecting when they should be parallel by sunlight, indicating that the light source is really close, and kind of fake backdrops appearing not too far behind the astronauts, and strange shadows and strange reflections and things like that. So I guess that kind of planted the seed in my mind, and about 10 years later, at age 24, I was a filmmaker. And I was actually editing for the gentleman who had produced that program I had seen as a 14-year-old. And I asked him, what was that guy's name on your show? He said we didn't go to the moon. He said he didn't remember. I called the San Francisco production office. I did. They said they were about 2 or 3 days away from deleting all 10-year-old files. So had I called a couple of days later, I probably wouldn't have been able to get in touch with him. Wow. I tracked him down through his publisher. He has published maybe a dozen books or so, one of which was about the moon landings being fake, and I think he was one of the first guests of the first year Oprah was on the air as a talk show host. And so I called him up, and he suggested that being a filmmaker that I do film about it. And so I kind of looked into it first for about 6 months, checking in about the photographs, the administrator, Nixon, the Russians, and the science at the time. And it certainly seemed to me that there was at least a 25% chance, I'd say, that the moon landings were fake. And seeing how I kind of like puzzles, and this is a puzzle, and I have kind of a relentless personality, I thought, if anyone could get to the bottom of this, it'd probably be me. And then I'm a filmmaker. My job is to make fake scenes look real, so I can kind of discern the discrepancies in the pictures perhaps a little bit better than the average person. And after 6 months of looking into it and figuring there's at least a 1 out of 4 chance the greatest man event in human history was completely fraudulent, I turned down the project, fearing that it could be dangerous in the event they didn't go, and I start bothering people and stirring up dust. I thought it could be hazardous to my health. Right. And I thought, I want to have a wife and family someday. I'm a liar. Everybody's a liar. Why should I risk my life for someone else's folly? And then about 5 years went by, and I started reading the Bible, read it from cover to cover. Not that I really understood it, but I did agree that there is a right and a wrong, and that there is a judgment, there is a God, and that if the moon landings were fake, I realized that that would actually be more of a significant event historically than if they had actually gone. You had the two possibilities of being real, actually having the capability to go to the moon, plant a flag, and come back, or not having the capability, not having the humility to admit it, embezzling billions of dollars, killing people to keep it a secret. That would actually be more profound historically than if they'd actually went. And I realized I'm going to die anyway, so I might as well go out in a blaze of glory and figure this out. Because if the truth came out, it would seem like it would be a monumental realization for mankind that would benefit it, not necessarily emotionally, because it would be discouraging, but it would be like having cancer and not knowing it, or having cancer and knowing it. And having cancer is a bad thing, but it's better to know about it so that you can prepare and perhaps do something about it. If you're not aware that you have cancer, it's going to eat you up probably even sooner. and you'll be ill-prepared for it. And this is kind of the state of our country. When someone robs a bank, if they get away with it with $1 million, then they're just going to rob another one for $2 million and the next one for $4 million. And if whoever the shadow government, whatever term you want to use, are killing presidents, taking moon landings, and doing other false flag events, it seems like until they're caught, they will be emboldened to keep doing more and more wicked things. So that exposing this, I would think, could bring about, some reform or something. We'll have to see. Eventually, the truth will come out. Most people believe that. If you go to Sibrel.com, SIBREL.com, and click on the Conspiracy Corner link, you can read a story or an article I wrote about it. Which kind of outlays all of the arguments why the moon landings are fake. If you really think about it, we're coming up on 50 years, half a century, since the alleged moon landings in the 1960s with 1960s technology. And when, Columbus came to America, I think it was only a few months, then other nations started coming to America. When the Wright brothers put powered flight in the air, I think it was only a few months later other people were doing powered flight. And, when Lewis and Clark went west, shortly thereafter everybody went west. When Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic, it wasn't too long to where everyone was flying across the Atlantic. We had 747s doing it. So to say that someone went to the moon in the 1960s, and 50 years later, with 50 years better technology, no nation on Earth, including the one who allegedly did it, is able to repeat it. That's like me saying I did cold fusion. You say, show me, and I say, well, I can't do it again in 50 years. Wouldn't you really doubt whether I did it to begin with? The problem is that people's pride, so-called intellectuals or overly zealous patriots, it's like taking away candy from them. And they get very mad, and they consider it unpatriotic to tell the truth, that the government is corrupt. And people are like, well, the government wouldn't be that corrupt. They wouldn't be that audacious. And I think, we live in a world of rape, murder, incest, genocide. Why is faking a scientific accomplishment so preposterous? People have done that with Nobel Prizes and had to give them back. Yeah. So, and the other thing is that it's really the only positive conspiracy. I mean, whoever killed Kennedy, he's still dead. Whoever did 9/11, 3,000 people are still dead. Mm-hmm. But this is a positive conspiracy. It's probably the only positive conspiracy that I know of. And so trying to take that away makes it a negative that it's actually never been before. And it's the pride when someone's, an alleged intellectual or scientist, they somehow feel like they participated in the moon landings. Right. It's like people who watch a football game and say, we won, when not a single player is from their own state, when they weren't even on the field. So they weren't even in the stadium. So I'm going to say we won, but it's still we humanity, we America, we intellectuals, we scientists, we, whatever, went to the moon, and they kind of put themselves in there as a form of their own accomplishment. And they don't want to take that away. It'd be like me trying to take away your college degree that you worked hard for and earned, and I'm taking this away from people. Unfortunately, people what's really amazing is that people get really mad. I mean, if you said Wendy's is better and I said McDonald's is better, and you were going to kill me or punch me because I said McDonald's was better, you would think that'd be a little weird, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. All I'm saying is I have a different opinion than people. I think the moon landings are fake. They think they're real, and yet people foam at the mouth and threaten me with violence. There's a saying from a movie. It says, the likelihood of one individual being right increases in direct proportion to the intensity to which others are trying to prove him wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a great
if I were an astronaut and some guy came up to me and I really walked on the moon and I said, swear on a Bible that you walked on the moon, I'd say, sure, I'll swear on a stack of Bibles. Do you want me to sign an affidavit? Are you okay? Why would it make me mad? I don't see why. It would make me laugh. It would be, why would throwing a feather at somebody make them angry? On the other hand, if I walked up to a man in front of his wife and I said, well, how's your girlfriend doing? Now, that would make him mad, you see, because now I'm exposing that in front of his wife. And so when I walk up to these astronauts who have this lifelong reputation with their spouses, children, grandchildren, colleagues, companies that they work for only because they allegedly walked on the moon, and then I point it out, then they get mad. It's because I'm speaking the truth that they get mad. If what I was saying was preposterous, why would they care?
Yeah, for sure. I want to get back to the astronauts, and you kind of gotten into that area, but there are a couple things I want to ask you about the actual evidence and your footage that I don't want to run out of time with that. So I'm going to sort of I'm going to come back to the astronauts after, if that's okay. But I wanted just to, before getting into that evidence, I want to ask you the question of, do you think that as time goes on, just because of what you mentioned, that the fact that 50 years later we haven't gone again is so revealing, do you think that as time goes on it becomes even more obvious, and eventually, if we haven't gone in another 20 or 30 or 40 years, that it'll become common knowledge that we never went?
Really, eventually. There was a poll done in 1969, and at that time, 10% of Americans doubted the authenticity of the moon landings. They just had an instinctual interpretation of it that it was false. It was even preached from some evangelical churches that this was a lie. 2 Thessalonians 2:9 says that in the last days there will be counterfeit miracles. And, of course, putting a man on the moon is a modern-day miracle. Now, if you ask the American public, that amount has gone up, you could say, by 50% to 15%. If you ask people under 25, it's 25%. If you ask people who are not in America, it's, 50 to 80%. I know someone who bumped into a Russian intellectual and said, do Russians believe that the moon landings are real? They said, no, none of us do. Only the Americans believe that. It's very rooted in our controlled media. They keep running the anniversary specials year after year. It's just really preposterous. China is the most industrialized nation on the planet. They now have 5 decades of greater technology than the Apollo program, and it's going to take them 3 times longer to put a man on the moon if they meet their goal. Their goal is 3 times longer. It's going to take them 25 years instead of 8 years to go to the moon with 5 decades more of technology.
Do you have any?
I mean, that really is a little bit odd, don't you think?
Well, I think.
The South Pole has minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It has 200 mile per hour winds, and yet there's a base there because it's physically possible. People climb Mount Everest because it is physically possible. There is no one on the moon since 1972. There are no bases there, and it's very clear why, because it cannot be done. Now, if it cannot be done today, how could it possibly be done with 5 decades older technology? Technology does not go backwards unless the moon landings are real. Then, for the first time in history, technology went backwards.
Do you have any feelings about why other governments have? They must know. The Russian government must know. Why? Any thoughts on why they keep the secret?
Well, I think there's negotiations going on behind the scenes, just like the Cuban Missile Crisis was solved by secretly agreeing to pull bases out of Turkey or whatever. That only became public knowledge decades later. There's obviously negotiations going on. Why we sell, food to Russia, our enemy, below cost, why Nixon goes all the way to China, who runs over their own citizens with tanks, and yet we give them most favored nation trading status. There's all sorts of things going on. We're being blackmailed. I mean, you have to imagine, everyone says, well, they would just, blurt it out to the world. Well, would they? If I had a picture of a president with a prostitute, I could give that away free to the media and ruin him, or I could blackmail him for millions and millions of dollars every year until he died. That would be a better use of it. And to say, well, they had 100,000 people involved, well, they did, but do you think they're really going to tell the guy making the glove or the door or the boot or the handle or the light bulb or the wiring, hey, the missions are really fake? Of course not.
No.
All the guys at the computer consoles were receiving information. One of them acknowledged a couple of years ago that they could tell no difference between a simulation and an actual flight. And in my film, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which if you go to Sibrel.com, Sibrel.com, click on the YouTube link, go to a funny thing, there's this shot going past all the computer consoles right before the launch. This is like 10 seconds before the launch, and all of them are kicked back watching television like the rest of us.
Right.
Once the astronauts were on the rocket and up, from there they could have been anywhere. And this footage reveals that they were, bouncing information off the moon and pretending to be further away from the Earth than they really were. They were on the rocket, they went up, but they simply never left Earth orbit. The only time a human is said to have left Earth orbit would be going to the moon. People don't realize that the space shuttle only goes up 200 miles.
Yeah.
If you had a foot globe, that would be a half an inch above the globe. Pick a town that's 200 miles away from you. That's how high above the Earth the space station and space shuttle goes.
Right.
But the moon is 30 globes away instead of half an inch above the globe. It's 1,000 times farther than Earth orbit. It's completely different realm. And, of course, there's galactic solar radiation and the Van Allen radiation belts that you'd have to go through. Even George Bush, when he was talking about returning men to the moon, he said, we need to go back to the moon, this is a quote, as a logical first step to Mars and beyond. Okay? We're going back to the moon as a first step to Mars and beyond. So we're riding a bicycle, we're going to go back to a tricycle.
Yeah.
You see, why, if it's a first step, we've already done it. Why did he say we have to go to the moon in order to learn how to go to Mars if we've already been to the moon? Little contradiction there. Then he also said that before we can go to the moon, we need to learn how to protect the astronauts from lethal radiation.
Yeah.
Well, I would just do it the same great way that worked on Apollo.
Yeah.
You see, it doesn't make any sense. And the same president, George Bush Jr., when he commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers, he talked about, hey, we want to commemorate the Wright brothers, Lindbergh, and probes to Mars and beyond. He never mentioned the moon landings because he knew they weren't genuine.
Yeah,
and it probably soured him to put it as with these other real accomplishments.
Tell me, I want to get to the footage that was sent to you. How did you come to possess it's like nearly 2 hours of raw footage? And is that the footage that you received in 2000, or was that the same stuff we're talking about? That shows the halfway.
In 1999 or so, or maybe 98, when I started bumming through the archives there, they basically send out everything's pre-edited and pre-packaged, and if you ask for every picture of an astronaut on the surface of the moon during the first mission, there's only like 20 pictures. And when you ask them for a picture of Neil Armstrong on the moon, they don't have any. And they're dumbfounded themselves. There aren't actually any pictures of Neil Armstrong, first man of the moon, on the moon.
Yeah.
There's a TV image, and there's one from an automatic camera on the lunar module. Of course, you can't see his face. But an actual still picture, here's Neil Armstrong on the moon. There's not one picture. And I've been to the archives personally and asked them to show me a picture of Neil Armstrong on the moon, and they keep looking and they're dumbfounded that there isn't one. Now, the excuse is he was taking the pictures, that's why he's not in them.
Right.
However, if you've never been to the moon before, there's micrometeorites, 500-degree temperature difference between light and shadow. I think you might want to bring a backup camera in case you drop it or something, But he did not want his picture taken. That's why he rarely gives interviews. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. Same with Michael Collins. They've got Blabbermouth Buzz doing all the talking for him.
Yeah.
But he didn't want his picture taken. Now, I asked for unedited footage, but I never got any, except these mislabeled tapes that Bill thinks someone deliberately sent to me. It's unedited raw footage of a single shot of the mission, and they're faking a shot. You can see this, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon on YouTube.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary. Until this footage, I was considering it a theory that they maybe faked the moon landings. But with this footage, it's just an absolute fact they didn't go. They're pretending to be halfway to the moon, creating a 1-foot model of the Earth from the spacecraft. It's the only fake shot the astronauts rigged themselves from Earth orbit, pretending to be halfway to the moon. And then you've got the third track of audio of the CIA holding them from speaking until 4 seconds have elapsed since NASA asked the question. You see, they're only 200 miles above the Earth, so they would hear the question and be able to respond instantaneously. But if they did, it would give away the fact that they're close to the Earth because of the speed of light. They're supposed to be further away to go out, further away to come back. And so someone was counting off 4 seconds. You hear NASA say the picture looks great. There's exactly 4 seconds of dead air on the third channel you hear talk. Yeah. And then the alarms will start speaking. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And then when this footage came out, there's the CIA or whatever their department is, they created a company called Spacecraft Films that allegedly released most of the footage that I showed and said, "See, there's nothing to it. It's not what Mr. Sabrell says. It's just that." Well, at the very beginning of it, the alleged unedited version, they actually edited out talk. They were trying to prove that there was nothing, outrageous or false about it, and yet they deleted the very part that proves that it's false.
And this is the 2002 footage we're talking about that they released. It was a couple of years after yours.
Yeah, and if you pop in the opening of the tape that I show in the film and pop in their DVD, they deleted the track of the CIA. They removed that audio. Now, if my footage proves nothing whatsoever, why are they monkeying around and editing out the very part that proves that it's fake?
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If talk means nothing, why didn't they leave it in there? They deliberately removed it because it proves that I'm right. It proves that there are 3 people on this radio frequency. According to NASA, there's only 2. But there's 3 on there. And it's a completely different audio EQ than NASA or the astronauts. And he's telling them when to speak after 4 seconds go by, because they're still in Earth orbit, as the tape proves. You can see the bright Earth out the window. You can see them creating this 1-foot model using the backlighting of the window, turning off the space. You see them lying, saying the TV camera's lens is at the glass of the window to shoot the tiny Earth far away, which would have to be if they're halfway to the moon, when in fact it's 10 feet back away from the window. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's absolutely outrageous. And they're faking being halfway to the moon, which means they couldn't even go halfway. They could not leave Earth orbit.
Now, I want to ask you a couple of details about this, because I've watched it a few times, and I'm trying to make sure I completely understand what I'm looking at. You mentioned a 1-foot model. Now, are you suggesting that something was put in the window, or because there's another film, there's the What Happened to the Moon footage that shows it like a transparency, and is that the same thing?
Well, it's either a section of the Earth outside of the cirque of the window, and the border of the window appears to be the border of the Earth, or a couple other people who have looked at it believe they took like a transparency, like a positive shot from an unmanned probe, and they put it in front of the window, and it was backlit by the Earth sun reflecting. Either way, they're using the window to create a 1-foot model of the Earth, either a section of the Earth out the window or transparency backlit from the Earth. Either way, it's a model. You can even see when the astronaut's arm, you can see hair on his arm crosses in front of the Earth.
Yeah.
Now, if the lens is at the glass like they claim, then that must be somebody not wearing a spacesuit outside of the spacecraft, which would be very dangerous. Or it's perhaps the arm of God moving across the Earth. Or the only other explanation is it's still inside the spacecraft and it's a 1-foot model. And then I should have done a split screen, the part where they say they're 130,000 miles out, and the very end of the tape where the lights come up. I mean, right before the lights come up, the Earth is the exact same proportion when they say it's 130,000 miles out, and then the lights come up and you see the camera's never been at the window. It's been at the back all the time, and they're using the window to create this, appearance of the Earth floating in space. It's completely false.
And it looks like you're seeing blue coming through the window. It doesn't just look like light. It looks like you're seeing the Earth. Is that what you feel
Yeah,
that we're
when the
seeing?
sun hits the Earth, when you're on the daylight side of the Earth in Earth orbit, and the sun's hitting it, it's extremely reflective. Of course, because most of the Earth is water, and the clouds are white, and so a lot of that light is just bouncing off like a mirror right off the Earth. So it's actually Earth shine. That's sunlight reflected off the Earth. It's very bright. It's almost as bright as the sun itself. If you're looking at it, it would probably cause your eyes to sweat. And it's pretty little clever fake shot that they did, but it proves they didn't go to the moon.
What do you think you would really see coming? Well, yeah. What do you think you would really be seeing if you were actually halfway to the moon, and you were looking out a window and you saw the sun? Do you think that it would be a lot less bright coming through the window than what we see in that shot?
Well, I think it would probably look similar to the fake shot that they, edited and showed the best part of. I think perhaps the proportion wouldn't be that small. They had a zoom lens, and they were kind of zooming in and out and making the Earth different sizes to say we're this far away and that far away and so forth. If you're standing on the moon and you're looking up at the Earth, you got to figure it's going to be 6 times bigger than the full moon is here on Earth. Yeah. So it would actually be pretty big. So the proportion that they showed would be actually way past the moon. So, nevertheless, that's what they did, and that's what looked convincing enough at the time, and no one questioned it. What? People wanted to believe that they went. They had no reason to think that they would lie about it. I mean, and Nixon was very well respected president, and everyone wanted to believe. They needed a pep rally during the Vietnam War protest, something to cheer about. People wanted to believe it.
Yeah, it took.
So they did.
It took our focus away from a lot of the really negative stuff that was going on, though it's the war in particular, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. People say, well, I know it's real because I saw it on TV. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Well, you made the point, too, that the quality of the image that we saw was so poor that it would that you feel it was deliberately done that way, and that the TV networks had to reshoot basically like a second generation just in order to keep the quality.
It was actually fourth or fifth generation by the time it aired. We're talking about the black and white TV pictures allegedly from the moon surface. Yeah. Now, you got to figure in 1967 and 68, Gilligan's Island, I Dream of Jeannie, and Bewitched went from black and white to color. Now, this is the richest country on Earth spending unlimited resources on this high-tech event of going to the moon. I would think you'd want to have a high-resolution color camera just to prove how clever you are. You know what I mean? I mean, if a high-resolution color camera is good enough for Gilligan's Island, I would think it would be good enough for NASA. But the sets were fake, and they didn't want to reveal too much fake detail. So the networks wanted a live feed. NASA would not give it to them. They took a feed, they projected it on a huge projection TV. Imagine a projection TV of the quality of 1969. Then the TV camera filmed that. Then that was put to a TV screen. Then another TV camera filmed the TV screen, and that is what went out to the network. Yeah. And so they deliberately degraded the quality of it. Now, I think it was 2001 or so, Ron Howard did an IMAX film commemorating the moon missions. And he went to NASA, and he asked for the original tapes to be transferred super high definition IMAX. A few days later, that was when they lost all of the videotapes from all of the TV transmissions from all of the moon missions. Now, I estimate these reels, I think they're called DLT tapes, but I think they're 2-inch data, kind of like an analog videotape, kind of like what they use to record All in the Family with. Pretty high quality. And they're pretty heavy reels. They're about maybe 10 to 20 pounds each, and it probably, I would think, at least 1,000 pounds of them somehow mysteriously disappeared from the hermetically sealed NASA National Archives. I mean, we have copies of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that are more than 200 years old. You'd think we could keep some videotapes that are like 30 and 40 years old So Ron Howard was about to show them at 4 or more times greater than the resolution that had ever been seen. They panicked. That's when they lost them, and they deliberately disassembled the only machine on the planet that could ever read the tapes in the event they were found, and threw all the parts away.
Now, how do we know that they did that? Did they announce that they had done that because they didn't feel they needed them anymore?
They admitted that they lost the tapes. They admitted that they disassembled the only machine that could ever play the tapes in the event they were ever found. So basically, Ron Howard's film, which is supposed to be about the moon landings, 95% of the film are reenactments on set, rather than the real footage. And some of the footage, he shrinks down to like 10% of the screen because the only copy he could find was off of a VHS tape at Blockbuster. You can even see the VHS tracking line at the bottom, and that's why he reduced the size by 90%. And made 95% of the film reenactments. There's actually very little footage available of the moon missions. To his surprise, to everyone's surprise. And, it's pretty sad. They keep trying to say how great it is, but eventually the truth will come out. Everyone's going to look like a fool, and the government's, so whoever's going to be president at the time is going to say, well, it wasn't on my watch. I don't have anything to do with it.
Well, haven't they? They've lost a lot of things, or they claim that they've lost a lot of things. They've lost lots of moon rocks, from what I understand, and they've lost even manuals for some of the machines that they created for the missions have disappeared.
Well, if you ask for the schematics, wiring, blueprints of the Saturn V rocket or the lunar module, they say they're not classified, but they're not available. They say they were all destroyed. You see, someone eventually looking into it could figure out that if you're sitting on the moon surface at 250 degrees Fahrenheit and you're powering air conditioning for about 3 days, and they claim it got down to 72 degrees inside the lunar module on basically a bank of about 8 or so car batteries.
Yeah.
I don't think that's actually possible. And there are things like this that could be proven if they kept the blueprints and the schematics and the electrical drawings and everything. Same thing with the Saturn V rocket. It did not actually have enough fuel to leave Earth orbit. And someone could prove that. Von Braun said so in writing, and we have his documentation to prove it. He said, going to the moon in a single rocket is impossible. He said it would take 3 rockets, each taller than the Empire State Building, each weighing 10 times the amount of the Queen Mary. Basically, he said it would take about 58,000 times more fuel than the Saturn V rocket had.
Well,
in order to go.
Yeah,
he said it would be impossible to build. He said you first had to have a space station and ferry fuel to the space station, and then from there to go to the moon, which is not how he recanted on his math by about 58,000% when he built the Saturn V rocket. Now, if a guy messes up on his math by 58,000%, I don't think he's the guy you really want building the rocket going to the moon, do you? And so that's why they lost all the specifications and engineering specs and everything on it, because it could be proven in a lab eventually that they couldn't do the claimed purposes.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I wanted just to the one point back on the halfway footage again. There's one of your, I guess, critics or a debunker who's put up a YouTube video. He's explained or tried to explain this by saying that NASA wanted to rehearse everything and practice everything so that when they actually did it for the audience back home, that everything would look as good as it could look, and that he explains this whole thing with the shot out the window and the essentially as being a practice.
Yeah, I appreciate his explanation, because what he's doing is admitting that the footage is false. Now, here's where we need to take it from beyond there. Okay, so the guy, my critic, admits that the footage that I have is false footage of a fake shot. So he admits it. Secondly, NASA has never said that. That is his personal opinion of why they did what they did. NASA's official statement is that the footage is genuine and that I'm misinterpreting it. So secondly, the mission cost about $1 million a minute. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're going to rehearse the shot of being halfway to the moon, why not just use the real moon out the real window? Right? Why would you go to this elaborate hour or two to build a 1-foot model of the Earth and to rehearse by faking it? Why not just rehearse with the real moon right out the window? You see?
Mm-hmm.
It totally is illogical. Why would they spend more than an hour at $1 million? That means they would spend 2 hours on it. They would spend $120 million rehearsing something that was right outside the window with a fake Earth. Why would they do that? You say it makes no sense. And again, that is not NASA's official statement. They say it's real footage. So this guy has acknowledged that the footage is fake, and because he's such a naive fan of NASA, he's trying to explain for them, why the footage is fake. Well, they're just rehearsing. Well, they just rehearse with the real Earth out the window. They wouldn't have to create a model. It'd be a waste of time.
Well, yeah, right, and that actually brings me to the other footage that's part of this unedited footage that you've got that shows them orbiting the moon, but it says it's a test, and it says it was done on July 11th, and yet it shows, what appears to be either they're orbiting the moon or it's a fake shot of them orbiting the moon. But why would they do that? Why would they have a fake shot of the moon on July 11th?
Yeah, that's a good point, and that wasn't in the documentary, but it's some supplemental footage. We have an unedited reel of alleged lunar orbit shot from the command module, allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think NASA probably has clock technology and calendar technology. And, I'm in the film business, and when you put a date on the slate, it's not, yesterday's date, it's not tomorrow's date, it's today's date.
Right.
So this footage, now this original slate was always edited out for the few seconds that they liked of the fake shot, and showed we have the unedited version with the original slate, and it shows that lunar orbit was shot, whatever the date is, 9 or 10 days or whatever it was before they even left for the moon. Somehow they're orbiting the moon before they left, which is a pretty good thing to do. Secondly, there's a part in the footage. Now, the command module is allegedly orbiting the moon at about 4,000 miles an hour. And there's one part in the footage where the orbit just stops. The camera adjusts, and then it picks back up again. Now, that's a pretty good little trick, going from 4,000 miles an hour to 0 in 1 second, and in 1 second later going from 0 to 4,000 miles an hour. Secondly, being in the film business, you can see that the contrast of the moon itself is a lot less sharp and detailed and color than the foreground of the alleged lunar module. That's called rear projection. These composites of the moon were shot from an unmanned probe, so they would be geographically accurate. Then they created a model where they actually pasted all the pictures on a circular model of the moon. You can actually even see a picture of it in a book that they claim they only used for rehearsing the landing, but they actually did for this fake shot. And then you film that one time, then you project it on a screen, and then you put the little model in front of it. That's why the projection behind it is faded and not as sharp and not as bright in color, because it's a second generation being photographed of the first generation of the model. Thirdly, the slate also says on it, test. Well, that's a film term. What that means is special effect. When you're doing a special effect, they're called tests. And you keep doing another test and another test and another test, and you use the last test as the one that you use. And the special effects, or the director will say, no, make it bigger, make it smaller, make it faster, make it slower, make it brighter, make it dimmer. And when they finally get one, the last slate still says test on it. But test means it's a special effect shot, is what it means.
Uh-huh. There's another shot in there that struck me as well, where you can see one of the astronauts. I don't know if it's supposed to be Aldrin or Armstrong, doing something, and it's from this camera that you mentioned that's mounted on the lunar module. That's taking frames. I don't know if it's every second or less than that, but you can actually see in one of the shots very clearly, you can see his face through the visor. And it just strikes me that on all the other shots we've seen of any of the Apollo missions, you can't see anyone's face. And why can we see it in that case?
Yeah, they're supposed to have a gold visor on top of it because the sunlight, allegedly, on the moon is 20 times brighter than it is on Earth because they have no atmosphere. So you can imagine you could go blind looking at it. So they had these gold visors on there, which would basically be like looking through a welder's torch or welder's mask.
Right.
And when they were actually in the studio, it's not anywhere near that bright, and they put the gold visor down, they wouldn't be able to see. It would be pitch black to them. So they lifted it up, apparently to move around and not fall over or bump into something. Also in that footage, you can see that they're pointing to somebody off camera. They're giving them like hand signals, and they're pointing down to their footprints. They're walking around in circles, and they're kicking up dirt back over their footprints as if to do another take without showing that they had walked there before. Now, again, if this is costing $1 million a minute, I don't think they're going to walk around on the moon kicking up dirt and doing the same take over and over again.
Yeah, I saw them doing that. I didn't realize that I didn't see the hand signal. I've got to...
It seems like they're pointing to somebody off camera, saying, "Hey, look at this part of the set here. Look at the dirt here. There's something here that you need to do. Either fix it, or make sure we do it right, or don't show this, or something like that."
So, do you think that was part of what was not really NASA really wouldn't have wanted you to see?
This is part of the unedited reel. This is unedited footage. Again, nobody has ever got unedited footage that I'm aware of except me. And even though I specifically asked for it time and time again, I never got it until a friend Bill's apparently sent it to me from NASA. And they don't want people to have unedited footage. In fact, at the beginning of the tape that proves that they didn't go, it says, big warning, do not show this to the public.
Right.
So, they wanted to make sure no one made that mistake. And so I got it, and it proves they didn't go to the moon. It shows fake shots, special effects shots, third channel of audio, the CIA telling them to wait 4 seconds before they answer so that it appears they're further away from the Earth. And it proves they didn't go to the moon. And I've talked to professors at colleges, and I said, doesn't this prove we didn't go? No, I still think we went. I said, well, what if you saw Neil Armstrong on national TV confessing that the moon landings are fake? And he said, I still think we went. Now, this is a college professor teaching people at the university level, and he says if an eyewitness of the event told him it was fake, he would still believe that the moon missions were real. Now, that tells you that pride is blinding otherwise intelligent people from being able to see the truth.
Yeah. One thing that strikes me in the lunar photography is that the size of the Earth looks much too small for what you would think it would be, because since the Earth is so much larger than the Moon, we look up at the Moon from the Earth, and it should be a lot larger than that.
Yeah, I think it should be about 6 times bigger than a full moon, because the Earth is 6 times bigger. So that's about, if you're standing up. So yeah, I agree. There's a couple of shots where they pasted in, Earth in the upper part of the picture, and it was shot from an unmanned probe. And yeah, I think it would be a lot bigger. You're right.
Well, there's the one shot that strikes me in particular is this sort of famous one, the low angle shot looking up at the astronaut with the American flag, and it's sort of makes a V shape, and it's sort of pointing towards the Earth, which looks way far away. Tiny?
Yeah, it looks like kind of a small, distant full moon in proportion when it should be.
Yeah.
Like, 6 times bigger. Yeah, well, they did their best. No one's perfect.
What do you think about the idea that Stanley Kubrick may have been responsible for doing the shooting, and that he may have put some clues to this effect into his film The Shining? What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I had that thought, at least that he participated in it, and then I mentioned that, I think, years ago to the filmmaker who put a documentary together about it, and then he brought out to me all of these little signs in there. It's kind of an incidental little side note. The fact is the moon missions were fake. The fact is they had to have convincing photography. So they had 2 choices. They could hire the general of the media department at the Pentagon and get great security and amateur results, or they could hire the best filmmaker on the planet, get great pictures in the short term, and worry about his security later, which had to be the choice that they had to have made. Unless you can convince people, all is lost. So they had to hire the best filmmaker on the planet, and guess what? He happened to be shooting a film about going to the moon, 2001: A Space Odyssey. And the flight director, Cranston, and Von Braun visited the set of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Von Braun also visited Antarctica 6 months before Apollo 11 to retrieve hundreds of pounds of lunar meteorites, which I presume they altered slightly to make it appear as though they had come directly from the moon during the Apollo mission. So we have Stanley Kubrick very likely having shot Apollo 11. Then, when Apollo 12 went to the moon, they allegedly accidentally pointed the camera at the sun, meaning they only had a minute and a half of TV pictures. And then Apollo 13 didn't go to the moon, and then Apollo 14. So you basically have 2 years between crystal clear images of the first mission and crystal clear images of the next mission. 2 years for them to follow Kubrick's lead and style and faking the missions after that. Actually, it's easier to convince people, even with less advanced workmanship, because people have already accepted that the moon mission is real. So it's actually easier to fool them later on. You don't actually have to make them as good or better. The idea is, very likely, if I would say at least a 95% chance that Stanley Kubrick did shoot Apollo 11, and probably after that he turned it over to NASA, and maybe his special effect or cinematographer, Douglas Turnbull, maybe had something to do with it. Now, in the movie The Shining, what was first brought to my attention is you have the little red rum boy who in one particular scene is wearing a custom knit sweater, made out of yarn. And I don't know how long it took to knit the thing, but it took a while, and it had to be deliberately made. And on it, it says Apollo 11. And then he's standing up, which represents like the rocket launch. And if you look at the pattern of the carpet, it's pretty similar to the pattern of Pad 35A or whatever they launched from out at the Kennedy Space Center, or whatever it was called at the time. And then, another thing that the guy pointed out to me, then he goes to room 237, and I think in the book it was something like room 213.
Yeah.
But Kubrick changed it. And it's funny, Stephen King gets so mad because he changed the room number. I mean, get over it. But in any case, he changes it to 237, and at that time, in the encyclopedias of that day, it was 200. The medium distance from the Earth to the Moon was 237,000 miles.
Right.
So you have this launch pad pattern in the carpet. You have the little boy with a rocket that says Apollo 11 standing up or launching, and then he's going to 237,000 miles away, room 237. And then there's like the eagle on the desk, and a lot of these things are, I think, read into it way too much. But if a third of them are true, it's still highly significant.
Well, one thing we know about Kubrick is that nothing appeared in his films without it being put there on purpose. So
that is true.
Whatever he wanted us to get from it, was not accidental.
Well, there's actually a shot in Clockwork Orange that actually looks very similar to the set of the moon landing, at least lighting-wise. There's a scene where the main character and his three cronies are in a rundown theater, and they are having a gang fight. And the way that they did the lighting to look interesting on the moon and convincing is they put the lights fairly low to create these long shadows, kind of like really, sunset horizon lighting shadows. And there's a scene where they have like rocks on the ground where the two gang members are facing each other in A Clockwork Orange, and the lighting is really low, and there's rocks on the ground, and it looks exactly like the same lighting in the moon pictures.
Interesting. I'll have to go back and watch that now.
And when they're beating up the old guy, he either says men orbiting the Earth. I don't think he says men on the moon, which is kind of interesting, because in 72, I might be mistaken about this, but in 72, men were already allegedly on the moon, and the guy they're beating up says men orbiting the Earth, but I don't think he actually says on the moon. Maybe he does, but I thought he didn't say it, which was kind of interesting. He only said orbiting the Earth. He didn't actually say on the moon, and if they were on the moon at that time, he would have mentioned it.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a clue in there or not. And then, of course, his last film, this is a big clue, was called Eyes Wide Shut. And he had a contractual agreement for it to be released on a particular day. I think it was July 16th, 1999. And the studio didn't really know why he insisted that it open on that day, but he wouldn't sign the contract unless they agreed to it. And get this, he died before the release of the film, so it posthumously still was released on the day that he wanted. July 16th, 1999, Eyes Wide Shut, the 30th anniversary of the launch of Apollo 11.
Right. That's an incredible little detail.
I think that's a big clue. Now, I talked to his wife at length, and she wouldn't really say anything, but I got the impression that she knew something and wasn't telling me something. That was my impression.
Is there the fact that this was part of this was a contractual thing, is there a way for us to confirm that? Like, is there proof of that, or is that just...
Well, you just go on the internet and look at the release date for Eyes Wide Shut. You'll see it's July 16th, 1999.
But in terms of that being part of his contract, though, how do we sort of...
Well, I mean, come on. It's Kubrick's last movie. And it's called Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah.
and it's his movie, Who Faked the Moon Landing, and it opens on the 30th anniversary of the moon landing.
Oh, come on. I'm on board. Don't get me wrong. I agree, but it's nice to be able to nail these things down.
He's in charge of the movie, and I'm sure he picked when it was going to be released on. I don't think it's a coincidence that the guy most likely to have shot the fake moon landings has his last movie called Eyes Wide Shut opening on the 30th anniversary of the moon launch. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not a coincidence.
Right? I don't think so, but I don't think it is. But I do want to ask you about, do you believe that clues were deliberately put into the record by people that maybe wanted us to figure this out over time, but they didn't want it?
Bill Casey told me that early on, and I never believed him until like the last year or two.
Oh, yeah?
And I think he's right. I mean, if you look at the most published picture of Buzz Aldrin, allegedly, it's like we can't even see his face, of him standing there with his arm bent. There's like 7 clues right in that picture. Number one, there shouldn't be any wrinkles in his spacesuit if it's pressurized. There should be like the Michelin Man, right? Mm. In fact, nowadays, the spacesuits have joints in them because their arms just balloon out, and you can't even bend your arms without having a metal joint in there. Now, because they were designed for 1/6 gravity, when they shot virtually the same suit on Earth, they had to remove the cooling units and a bunch of stuff to bring the weight down so the guy wouldn't fall over backwards. Well, the thing isn't pressurized. It couldn't be, because if it were pressurized, they'd have to have the cooling unit in there, which would be too heavy for Earth gravity, and he'd fall over backwards, which means cooling unit is out, which means it's not pressurized, and that's why the suit has all of these wrinkles in it. Plus, he's just standing there leisurely with his arm bit at 90 degrees. Again, it's not pressurized. Then if you look in his faceplate, you can see an angular shadow that's kind of halfway between a light shadow and a dark shadow of the wall behind him. The actual wall that's like 14 feet tall behind him, casting a secondary shadow. Then he's lit up, by what's called an umbrella light. The sun's behind him, so he should be pitch black, but he's lit up. It's, I went to this wine tasting once, and the guy could tell you from the guy who taught the class what kind of wine it was, how old it was, from what province in France it came from, and I'm like, are you kidding me? But I can tell you what kind of light is being used on him. It's called an umbrella light, and it's called a fill light. Rather than putting a light directly on him, they shoot it the other direction into a reflective umbrella, which then bounces back onto him, and that's what's causing the detail in the front of the suit. They wanted a nice-looking picture. So with the sunlight behind him, you couldn't see any detail on the picture, which is what would have made it look realistic. But they were so greedy to show off, his suit or whatever, they actually put a supplemental light on it. According to NASA, because it's 20 times brighter on the moon than the Earth, its own atmosphere, they took no lighting equipment, no flashes.
Yeah.
But in some of the pictures, they have a huge boulder, and the shadow is just like dark, deep, coal black.
Yeah.
And yet, in this picture, his shadow is not black at all. It's even a shot, the door of the lunar module in Apollo 11 was on the shadow side.
Yeah.
And it's so bright, and it's even recessed. It's like in a crevice.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
I do. I know the shot you mean, yeah.
Inside, and it's bright enough to where you have to squint your eyes. How did you get a bright light in this dark cavity of the door well on the shadow side of the lunar module?
Yeah.
It's not possible. Unless, of course, you're using electrical lighting. Then it would be possible. Then you have shadows intersecting at 90 degrees in some of the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, give me a break.
Yeah.
I mean, the sun is 92 million miles away. It's 1,000 times greater in diameter than the Earth. My shadow and your shadow, they're always going to be parallel with one another. My shadow and the lunar module shadow, they'll always be parallel with one another. They're at 40 degrees, 50 degrees, and some at 90 degrees difference. It's ridiculous.
And you see the hot spots, too, on the ground that don't look...
Yeah, that's a little unnatural, too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what causes that.
Well, you don't see that on the Earth, do you? You don't
ridiculous.
see hot spots on a sunny day. On one person's lawn is more brightly lit than somebody else's lawn, unless there's clouds. So it looks pretty unnatural for sure. There's a couple of things in the later. You mentioned the later missions. Maybe they didn't have to be as careful, and it made me think of two things. One being that amazing shot where the astronaut appears to be lifted up by a wire. He's like leaning forward, and he just sort of pops up without appearing to put any pressure on his legs to push himself up.
Yeah, here's what they did. That even with the cooling units out, they were falling over. And another clue in that famous picture. Look at the picture of Buzz Aldrin. Okay.
Yeah.
Look at his backpack in the top right-hand corner. Where's the antenna? I mean, after all, he's transmitting 250,000 miles away. And in all the other pictures, he has an antenna sticking out of it. You can see the antenna just starting, and then it's cut off. I had a book of that picture was on the cover of it, and if you took a horizontal line that went straight across the top of the backpack, from that line up, it was a very dark black, and the black to the left and the right below that, to the left and right of the backpack, was a different shade of black. On this particular picture on the cover of this book, they had pasted a little black masking tape or something and rephotographed the picture because the cables holding them up were showing, and they just pasted right on top of the antenna because they were in a hurry, apparently.
Wow. Well.
Yeah, where's his antenna, right?
Well, I hadn't thought of that one. I hadn't thought of that one.
And you can see it just starting, and it's cut off. because they pasted black on top of it because he was being held up by cables. And that's why I saw that video footage. It's pretty clever. The guy's, almost over at about 100 and 160 degrees or something. And he just, snaps right back up. It's pretty good.
Well, it's a talent that I've never seen anybody show on Earth, that's for sure.
Well, in my film, you can see when this kind of floaty, bouncy kind of feel to the picture, it looks very convincing. But when you double the speed, they're just getting off the ground like an inch. They should be able to leap at least 6 times taller and probably more like 10 or 12 times taller. They originally estimated the amount of gravity based on the diameter of the moon, but it's actually based on the density of the moon. Mm-hmm. The Earth has an iron core, the moon does not. Therefore, it's less dense, and gravity is actually caused by the density, not the overall circumference. So he actually would have been able to leap probably 12 times higher than on Earth. And in the pictures, he didn't do that. Certainly in Apollo 11, maybe they figured out with the bungee cords, they were able to do it a little bit higher. But they should be able to go extraordinarily high up. And of course, they didn't do that.
Even if they went 3 or 4 feet, it would have looked more realistic.
There was a National Geographic special that tried to refute all my accusations, and they showed the speed double, but they deliberately zoomed in on it so you couldn't see their feet and how high they were getting off the ground. It was like, and they were trying to prove me wrong, but they couldn't. If they showed the footage like I showed it, the same shot with the speed doubled, because people would see that they weren't getting off the ground. So when they doubled the speed to prove it didn't prove anything, they actually zoomed in beyond the feet, so you never saw the feet and how high they were above the ground. Additionally, they went out to a desert at night and put a spotlight and said, we're going to recreate, how it looks on the moon and see the shadows intersect, so I'm wrong. They were actually proving me right. They proved that it was shot by an electrical light. Why didn't they just go out to the desert during the day and light it by sunlight? Do you see this?
Yes.
They actually proved me right while they were telling people that they were proving me wrong. Can you see the psychological tactic in that? They went out to a desert at night. They had people dress up in spacesuits. They put a spotlight on it and said, see, the shadows intersect, so I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's the opposite.
They were proving that the shadows intersect because it's an electrical light. If they wanted to see what it looked like, why didn't they just wait 12 hours?
Sunlight, yeah.
Photograph it with the sunlight. The same thing on that show Mythbusters. They made a little shot. They made a little moon set with models, and they lit it with a spotlight and said, look, the shadows intersect, so I'm wrong. Well, they're actually proving me right. Well, it was the fact that it's lit by an electrical light source that is close. It's the proximity of the light that makes not necessarily 2 light sources. It's the proximity of it.
Right.
I mean, if there's a spotlight and you're to the left of the spotlight and I'm to the right of the spotlight, even though we're both 10 feet in front of it, the shadows are going to go in different directions.
Right.
That's why they intersect, because the light source is extremely close. If the sun is 92 million miles away and 1,000 miles wider than the Earth, the shadows are always going to run parallel. It's amazing.
Yeah.
These people use electrical lighting to reenact the moon landings and say, see, the shadows intersect when they're lit the way they're supposed to be, which proves that they were lit by electrical lighting. I don't know why they just didn't take their little models and set them out in the parking lot in sunlight.
Yeah.
It's absurd. All the while they're lying to people, they're actually proving that the missions are fake and telling them, no, it actually proves that they're real. It's amazing.
Well, the footage, the moon footage, the alleged moon footage shows examples where the 2 astronauts are a few feet apart from each other, and one of them has looks like about a 10-foot long shadow, and the other one has like a 20-foot long shadow. So the shadows end up ending at the same point, but they're not the same distance away. Which of course it wouldn't happen with the sun, right? You wouldn't get different lengths of shadows from people that are just a few feet apart from each other.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe Kubrick left a little of these clues deliberately. Who knows? Hard to say.
Well, let me. I don't want to. I don't want to keep you too long here, and I want to finish off. I said I was going to come back to the thing about the astronauts, and I'd like to kind of finish off on that if I can. First of all, I mean, the thing that you've noted this, and it really struck me when I first saw it, which was the press conference, the Apollo 11 press conference, where the three astronauts look so incredibly depressed. And it just seems to me, I can't interpret that any other way than they just feel horribly miserable and guilty that they're being asked to lie to people. Is that how you see it?
Well, definitely. I only show about 20 seconds of this, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked people, what was the most convincing thing in the film? About 4 out of 5 people say the window shot, but about 1 out of 5 say their expressions at their press conference. I mean, imagine the faces of someone in the locker room after they win the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, you see their expressions looking down, fidgeting, and looking like their parents just died.
Yeah.
They were completely unhappy, completely dejected, completely sour, broken-hearted, which is perfect expression if they're being forced to lie about it to the world and to the scientific community about something that they really didn't do. That'd be the perfect expression for it.
Yeah. So, what made you just choose to confront the astronauts with this and to prompt the reaction that you got? What made you decide that was an approach you wanted to take?
Well, I had heard the expression in court, swear in the Bible, and I thought, why don't I just go around and see if I can track these guys down and see if they're swearing the Bible that they walked on the moon or not, and see if I can schedule interviews with them. And I tell them I want to do an interview about the moon landings, which is true. They just assumed it was that I was a believer. It is about the moon landings, the interviews are.
Right.
And, of course, very few of them will swear in the Bible. The one guy who did, when I pointed out to him that he did and that he was the first person to do it, he kind of freaked out. They became very violent. They start cursing. One punched me, one kicked me, one threatened to kill me. An astronaut threatened to kill me.
Can you tell us which one that was?
Well, that was Ed Mitchell. He threatened to shoot me, and his son threatened to call the CIA and have me assassinated.
Yeah, I remember that footage,
All of which we have on camera.
Yeah.
Now, why would they want to kill me if they really went to the moon and I'm just some nut who thinks it was fake? Why would they care?
Mm-hmm.
If they really didn't go to the moon, and I was really a thorn in their side, then I can understand why they might want to kill me or be violent against me.
Yeah. So they're just not. They're not dealing well with being accused, I guess, because they feel there's very little they can say other than maintaining that they went. Yeah. So, what about let me know about the Gus Grissom thing too. You feel that that was a deliberate thing, obviously.
Well, I've talked to Betty Grissom. I think she's deceased now, for hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to Scott Grissom, who's his son, and he's a 747 pilot for Federal Express. So, he knows a little bit about aeronautics. Mm-hmm. And they both are absolutely, totally convinced that their father and husband, Gus Grissom, was murdered deliberately by the United States government.
Right.
Now, they don't know why, but they believe he was murdered. With that is the Apollo 1 fire. I think that was January 27th, 1961. No, was it? No, I'm sorry, 1967.
Right.
Where this was the crew that would have been the first crew to walk on the moon. Gus Grissom would have been in the place of Neil Armstrong. And he was complaining up the chain of command that nothing was working. In fact, a few minutes before he died, they couldn't get the intercom to work. And he said, guys, how are we going to go to the moon if we can't talk between two buildings?
Right.
And then there's even a shot, I don't bring attention to it, but in the moon film, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, where Neil Armstrong is rehearsing getting a soil sample, with a stick and a little cup on the end of it. Mm-hmm. And the cup falls off. So if they can't, that thing has 3 parts: the stick, the ring, and the cup. And they can't even get something with 3 parts to work. And Gus Grissom saw this. And he complained at the chain of command that this needs to be fixed and no one would fix anything because they knew they were only going to go to Earth orbit, which they had already done. And at this point, they had not totally committed to faking the moon landing, so they had not told the astronauts at that point. That's why he was getting so frustrated. So a few days before he burned alive, he took a lemon off of his tree in the backyard. It was the size of a grapefruit, and hung it on the top of the command module, calling it a lemon, having an impromptu press conference. And the generals were furious. We can't trust this guy to fake the moon landing when he's using the media to complain that this Apollo moon rocket is a piece of junk. The only astronaut who called the Apollo rocket a piece of junk died a few days after he did so.
Yeah.
And that was a warning to the rest of them. Play ball or else.
And you found out that there were traces of cyanide gas?
I didn't. His family did.
His family did, okay.
Right. Basically, the autopsy, and I have a copy of the report. It's called in fact, they renamed it. It's called the Apollo 301 accident report. Get this. Why did they call it? I think it's 301. It could be 201. I think it's 301. Apollo 301 accident report. You know why they did that? Because the report is supposed to be public information. And so when someone goes to the archives and looks for the Apollo 1 fire, they can't find it.
Oh.
I used to have a non-published number, which would cost, like, I don't forget what it is, $5 a month, $30 a month, whatever it was. So I just decided to list it as Rod Serling from the Twilight Zone. So everyone wanted to look up Bart Sabrell. They couldn't find me. I was listed as Rod Serling. And so when people looked up the Apollo 1 accident report, they couldn't find it because it was listed as Apollo 301. In any case, we paid $10,000 for it. We bought it from the widow of Roger Chaffee at her estate for $10,000. And I read it. And basically, one of the key things is that when they removed their dead bodies from the spacecraft, which was burned without even the rockets being fired, their safety belts were still buckled. Now, if there's a fire, the first thing you're going to do is undo your safety belt to try to get out of there. So what that means is they were dead before the fire. The fire was not the cause of death, like they said. What they had right before the fire began, they monitored the electrical current of the spacecraft during ground tests, and there was a dip in the current level. Somebody had gone in there. His widow, Betty Grissom, thinks it was the CIA, because she said the CIA people were around there before the fire happened. They had alligator clamps, some sort of device with a cyanide, gas chamber type of setup. And when they activated it by remote control, it sucked a little bit of the electrical current, and that's why it dipped down right before the fire. Then they died because of the gas, and then they had a second charge to start the fire to get rid of the forensic evidence of the cyanide. They did this to make sure they would be dead, that they couldn't get out in time, in the event the fire did not spread too quickly. They definitely wanted these guys dead. They wanted Gus dead. They weren't about to ask him to fake the moon landing. He would immediately go to the media and tell them.
Right.
And they killed 2 other guys along with it. It's just a warning, and also to make it look like they weren't singling him out.
Yeah. Well, that would explain why the astronauts would go along with it. They would have to be threatened with something, wouldn't they?
Yeah. From what I understand, Neil Armstrong was extremely outgoing personality before the moon landing, and became, an introvert afterwards. And being a test pilot and flying aircraft that's never flown before, and being an honorable man, if you bribe him, he probably would still say no. And if you threaten his life, it probably wouldn't mean a lot to him, you see?
Mm-hmm.
So they couldn't have him resign. That would cause too many questions. So if he won't accept a bribe, and he's not impressed when you threaten his life, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
You see, you have to threaten something else, the life of his family.
Right.
And when you do that, that's why he didn't want his picture taken. That's why he didn't want to give interviews. So on the 25th anniversary we showed in the film, he says to a group of high school students touring the White House, perhaps someday you'll be able to remove one of truth's protective layers.
Yeah, that's pretty, it's cryptic, but it's very revealing too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. There's all this information, all these facts, all this logic about how if no one can go back to the moon in China, it takes 3 times longer to get there with 50 years more technology. You have all this logic that they didn't go to the moon in the 60s. People still want to believe that they went. They want to believe America's great, humanity is great, science is great, technology is great, whatever. And it's amazing. Just because people have a degree in something doesn't mean that they're smart. Most of these people were spokespersons. There's 2 of them in particular who are always on TV. They're the 2 science guys that are always up there all the time. They really don't know what they're talking about, especially one of them is completely uneducated, incoherent, and is simply, passing on folklore about, what he's been told to say.
Is Phil Plait one of those?
I'm sorry?
Is Phil Plait one of those?
No, he's not. Phil Plait, acknowledged he's actually receiving money from NASA. I finally got it out of him. He tried to look like he was an independent, observer. When he finally admitted he got a paycheck from NASA when I pressed him on the issue. He told the truth. I appreciate that about him. You can be sincere and be sincerely wrong.
Right.
I don't know what your beliefs are biblically, but there are some churches that teach you can not repent of your sin, whatever it is, and be perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. And there are people who go there because they look up to their leaders and they assume their leaders know what they're talking about who believe that. You can be sincere and be sincerely wrong.
Yeah.
And it happens time and time again.
Yeah. Well, Bart, I should let you go because we've gone well over our time here, a few minutes over our time. But I just want to thank you very much for going into all this for me. It's a fascinating subject. That's one I've been getting into a lot more heavily in the last few years, and your film is definitely an important part of that case.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Bart. Appreciate it.
Sure. You take care.
Okay. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.